Would you survive being owned? Because in ancient Egypt, slavery wasn't just brutal, it was absolute. If you found yourself at the bottom of the social pyramid, not as a priest or scribe or merchant, but as a slave, you wouldn't last 24 hours. Let's set the stage. New Kingdom Egypt, the height of pharaonic power. Temples rise like mountains, the Nile floods predictably, and Ramses rules with divine authority. But for hundreds of thousands, life isn't ruled by glory. It's ruled by labor and chains. Slavery in Egypt wasn't based on race, but on status. Prisoners of war, criminals, debtors, anyone could find themselves enslaved. And once you were in, there was rarely a way out. Some were born into it, others were sold. But no matter how you got there, you belonged to someone else. Completely. Your day would start before the sun, not with breakfast, but with orders. Egyptian overseers didn't negotiate, they commanded. And for slaves, there was no protection, no recourse, no justice. Disobedience wasn't punished with a warning, it was punished with a stick, or worse. Tomb paintings show taskmasters with staffs and whips, driving workers in the fields and quarries. These weren't symbolic, they were real. You'd likely work in agriculture, construction, or domestic service. But let's be honest, service is the wrong word. You'd be hauling stones in the blistering sun, grinding grain until your hands bled, or cleaning out human waste from elite households. All without shoes, all without brakes. And if you ended up in the quarries or the gold mines of Nubia, your chances of survival dropped sharply. Mining conditions were beyond brutal. The air was thick with dust. The heat was stifling. Tunnels collapsed. The work was non-stop. Skeletons found in ancient mines show signs of malnutrition, chronic injury, and early death. Some didn't last a month. Food? If you were lucky, a mix of emmer bread and onions. Protein was rare. Clean water was scarcer. Sanitation was non-existent. Diseases like schistosomiasis, malaria, and dysentery were rampant. One parasite from the Nile could leave you feverish and doubled over in pain. And no, there was no doctor coming. Medical care was reserved for the rich. Even sleep offered no escape. You'd rest on the ground, maybe on straw, surrounded by insects and animals. Privacy? Non-existent. Comfort? Unthinkable. And if you had a family, you might not be allowed to live with them. Children were often taken and raised in separate households, trained to obey, never to question. Unlike in Greece, where some slaves could earn money or buy their freedom, or in Rome where manumission was relatively common, Egyptian slaves had almost no legal rights. They couldn't own property, they couldn't marry without permission, and they certainly couldn't say no. Some temples and state institutions kept large numbers of slaves, particularly women, to perform textile work, grinding, brewing, or cleaning. These tasks were repetitive and dehumanizing, stripping the individual of identity. Some women were pressed into roles as concubines or entertainers, again, with no say in the matter. Consent was irrelevant. And yet, the work didn't stop. In construction crews, you'd be part of a massive machine, building tombs and temples that glorified gods you were too tired to worship. The Valley of the Kings didn't rise from sand by itself. It was carved by hands like yours. Hands that blistered. Hands that broke. You might hear that some slaves in Egypt were treated well, and that's true, to an extent. Household slaves sometimes lived under the same roof as their masters. Some were educated, some even gained favor, but kindness wasn't guaranteed. It was a privilege, and it could vanish the moment you displeased someone. Religious ideology didn't help either. Pharaohs were gods on earth. Disobeying your master wasn't just an offense against a man. It was a sin against divine order. Egyptian culture reinforced the hierarchy as sacred, which meant resistance wasn't just futile, it was blasphemous. And resistance did happen. There are records of workers striking in Deir el-Medina, not slaves but skilled laborers. They stopped working until they were fed. But you? You weren't a skilled artisan. You were property. Striking would mean punishment, imprisonment, or death. Punishments could be horrific. Beatings, mutilation, and branding were common. Some slaves were blinded as punishment. Others were chained for days without food. Rebellions were rare, not because people accepted their fate, but because the system was designed to crush them before they began. Slavery wasn't unique to Egypt. Greece used helots and chattel slaves. Rome filled its cities and fields with captured peoples. But Egyptian slavery was older, more embedded, and in many cases, more inescapable. And while Rome might have granted a slave freedom in exchange for loyalty or years of service, and Greece might have used slaves as educators or household managers, Egypt's slave class had fewer options. You weren't climbing the ladder, you were trapped under it. Still think you'd make it? Try lifting limestone blocks in 100-degree heat with nothing but a loincloth. Try living under a master who can beat, sell, or starve you, and no one intervenes. Try sleeping on sand after coughing up river water that's infected your lungs. You wouldn't last 24 hours. Not because you're weak, but because the system wasn't designed for survival. It was designed for obedience. And when obedience was life or death, you learned fast, or you disappeared. Even the architecture you helped build offered no comfort. Massive temples and towering obelisks stood as a testament to power, not yours, but your master's. You might spend weeks carving a single column only to be moved to another site before you saw it completed. Your work became invisible, your name never written, your body buried in an unmarked grave. If you tried to escape, the penalties were swift and savage. Recaptured slaves were paraded publicly as a warning to others. Some were branded with hot irons. Others were executed in front of their peers. The message was clear. You run, you suffer. Most never tried. And then there was the constant surveillance. Overseers weren't just there to give instructions. They monitored every movement, every hesitation. Even a moment's rest could earn you a beating. These weren't just managers. They were enforcers of a system built to extract every ounce of labor from your body until there was nothing left to give. The weather didn't care if you were tired. The desert sun didn't pause for your pain. Sandstorms could blind you, flash floods could drown you, and yet, the work never stopped. Because even the elements were less cruel than your circumstances. Your death wouldn't make headlines. It wouldn't be marked by ceremony. A fellow slave might drag your body into a shallow ditch, or maybe no one would notice you were gone. There were always others to take your place. Freedom was a word you'd hear in stories, if you were allowed stories at all. Most slaves were deliberately kept uneducated. Knowledge was power, and power was for others, not you. You were born to serve, or captured to serve. Either way, your life belonged to someone else. But what happened if your master died? Some were buried with him, literally. Others were passed on like furniture, inherited by sons who saw you as nothing more than another possession. Death didn't free you. It simply changed your cage. Religious texts might promise a better afterlife, but those promises weren't written for you. The Book of the Dead was copied for nobles. Its spells and charms were reserved for those who could afford the scrolls, the rituals, the tombs. You were buried in the sand. And what of dreams, hopes? Slaves weren't expected to dream. They were expected to function. No ambitions, no voice, no future, just obedience, endurance, and silence. So no, you wouldn't survive as an Egyptian slave. Not because you lacked strength, but because the system didn't care whether you survived at all. It didn't require your hope, just your body.